Man, yeah, just wear the beanie. That's it.
That's pretty solid. I feel good about that. That's a good way to start this. Get the attitude up high, you know.
Good trade 2 J's if you could become Wolverine.
Where are you getting all this information?
I definitely heard some rumors about it. Are you still going? I get goosebumps thinking about it because it's like you can hear them get.
The car, I was going to qualify and I was going to drive that out the racetrack.
Just threw the hood over the ditch and
Longest employee of Knox.
You did some digging there, huh?
Look, I want to know right in the comments right now if you're coming to one of the events. If you are, drop a comment and let me know if you use the promo code FD Podcast to check out, save you a couple of dollars. Oh no, drive the comments up. You guys don't comment enough. I don't know if you knew this, but I'm in there all the time. And if I start seeing all these, that's only good for me. Makes the FD, the higher ups, the grand poobahs happy when you use FD Podcast at checkout. They're a little happy. I mean, they're not making as much money, but they're fine with it because they know you guys actually listen. And you do the things that I ask you to do. So if you're buying a ticket, take a couple seconds, FD Podcast at checkout, save a couple bucks. And at the end of the year, they go, hey, you sold a ticket. So see you guys out there. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Outerzone, the official podcast of Formula Drift. My name is Jacob Gettins, and today we have El Presidente on, Mr. Ryan Sage. We wanted to take just a little breather, a little check-in. Obviously, this season has been pretty crazy already. A lot of unexpected things, a lot of rule changes, a lot of format changes. So we're not going to be crazy long on this one, but we want to just kind of touch on from, I guess, both of our perspectives, talk about what's happening in the championship, what's happening with the rules, and then, any rumors or anything that we can spark before the end of the season or going into next season. So, from your perspective, how has this grand experiment gone? Like, how are you feeling about it? Because, it's a lot. It's the talk of the drifting world. I was just in Gutville. Everyone was asking me, what do you think of this? What do you think of seating? Do you think they're going to keep it? Are you happy with it? What are you hearing? So I'm kind of curious what you're thinking and what you're getting.
Yeah, I think everything kind of starts and stops with what our foundation kind of requires us to do. And so it's kind of difficult to understand the answer to the question that you just asked without first getting into why would you do something as extreme as it might seem, like going to an all tandem competition. There's obviously some, obvious reasons, like we were just clearly trying to make the events more exciting across all the days. But the other thing is that we are running 2 series at half of the rounds. And with those 2 series comes some major, major constraints, not only in the number of competitors, but the venues that we can actually go to facilitate it. And when we re-signed our deal with Road Atlanta in 2021, and then we also added Salt Lake City, we had 4 venues with ample space and also relatively ample time, though Salt Lake City is tighter. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have nighttime, to be able to accommodate both series. And that was with the old format. And so looking at all the problems that produced, like what we were able to have in terms of licensing, drivers coming in, drivers going out, what our format could ultimately be with qualifying, because it was running so long and we were having so much trouble making it exciting for fans. Some people did like it. We felt like we needed to have the ability to try and bring the show to a more impactful place and also give ourselves some latitude to be able to make some adjustments on the schedule over the event weekend. And then the final part is, once we do that, then more venues become optionable for us. In the old way of doing things, where we had, 3-4 hour qualifying and a certain number of drivers, we were pretty much stuck there. We couldn't make any changes and we could never go back to 2-run qualifying. So we were always going to be stuck with a version of the bottom 8 or whatever else. And that just felt like we weren't really doing the best we could do. And so, coming up with this all tandem format was kind of the way to test the theory of like, look, the show is all about tandem. How do we make it a show that we can A, use the same amount of tires, B, possibly go faster, C, it's more entertaining because that's what everybody wants to see. And then with the combination of those things, more flexibility to be at possible different venues in the future, because without doing that, the number of venues is super limited.
Yeah, and realistically, I feel like we've accomplished all those things. It's done what it was supposed to do. The show is tighter. The battles are nuts. There's a whole other group of stories for drivers. There's the driving has gotten better. We've seen drivers that fluctuate out of the seating. We've seen high-end drivers that have fallen into it. I think once we start to get into the West Coast rounds where a couple of these drivers start to come back into play, that's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, I would argue on all of those points that you were aiming for, we've hit those notes, and it's accomplished that set of goals. I mean, pretty much unilaterally.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, if we were running a one series show, like just pro,
yeah,
then probably the best option besides what we're doing now is the 2-run qualifying, because that really does, if what you're looking for is the ultimate version of merit-based performance going into a bracket, then you have to have that qualifying session. But what we had was like a bastardized version of that, essentially. You know, it was one run, high risk. The reward may or may not be what you want it to be. And ultimately, we were going to be constrained with the number of competitors that we could accommodate. And we were not seeing the excitement out of the show that we wanted to. Every driver was telling us, like, I'm just doing enough to get into the top 32. And once you start hearing that and understanding that, you know, you kind of have to, I guess, be humble and say, like, look, we're just not doing the right things here. Is there something better that we can do that checks all these other boxes? And I think the first year of it has been awesome from an entertainment perspective. You said it yourself, like, some of the best battles have been in seating. You know, we have our kind of internal calls with teams coming up here in the next day or so. You know, it'll be good to get some real life feedback from them on how they experience it. They meaning every facet of a bull series, you know, guys that are ranked high, guys that are ranked low, pro spec, pro, et cetera, et cetera. Because I'm sure there's going to be some variation on how people feel about it. You know, if you're a guy that just hasn't gotten out of seating yet, you might hate it. But if you have that big picture mentality of, like, we're trying to grow the sport in such a way that every aspect of it is exciting, then you might, you know, be on board with it, even if it personally kind of hurts you competitively.
Yeah, I do think there's going to have to be some seeing the forest through the trees kind of moments with a few drivers. I mean, I will say the feedback that I've received from drivers is probably 90% positive, and any negative feedback I hear is either something we're trying to solve with something else, or somebody who has struggled to get out of that seating 16. And that's going to happen no matter what. You're going to have drivers who struggle to qualify. You're going to have drivers that were always in the bottom 8 that had to run again. Like, yeah, that's just part of sport, that there are going to be people who are not as good as other people. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of the case.
There's, you know, the logic behind being a better qualifying driver and therefore getting yourself into a better position in the bracket is an interesting one, but isn't the idea to be the best tandem driver, right? Mm-hmm. We could just do a qualifying event, but ultimately it's about how you drive with that other person. So it kind of feels like the logic of all tandem is supporting the drivers that are really, really good at tandem battling. And that being our product, that's kind of the thing you want to be good at.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, at the end of the day, that's who wins the event, is who is the best at tandem driving. There's nobody who wins an event by qualifying first. Like, it can help. There's obviously an advantage to it in a lot of ways. And there's a few disadvantages as well. But as you said, you have to be good at head to head. That's the only way you're going to win the competition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've liked it. I've been, singing its praises. I know there's a lot of eyes in the drifting world. I've had conversations with pretty much the broad spectrum of people, from event organizers to competitors in other series. And it's interesting. I feel like a broken record, but with what's going on here, what's going on in other series, like, I really do feel like we are going to look back on 2024 and be like, this was the precipice of a lot of change in drifting. Because it's not just FD that's changing. Drift Masters, Iron Drift King. There's other series, even stuff in Oman that's changing pretty drastically. Like there's a lot of change that's happening this year and next year. And it's going to be really interesting what takes hold and what gets implemented across the board, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, anecdotally, just a personal experience real quick, like usually not so much qualifying, even the old format, but every tandem battle is a massive anxiety for me because I know somebody's going to go home.
Yeah.
And you just learn to try to be stoic about the situation and know that there's essentially going to be, only one guy that's going to be standing on the top part of the podium at the end, and everybody else will have lost, at least a battle, in the old format or whatever. When we get done from the first battle in seeding, so from the grade 8 on, there's a loftiness that I feel like now we can have fun. Mm-hmm. And because it just becomes about positioning at that point. And I see it in the booth where the kind of the vibe loosens up a little bit. We had the first knockouts and now it's about positioning and the guys can push hard and have fun. And it doesn't really matter that much because it's really just about where you're going to be slotted in that bracket. I've never experienced anything like that in the sport before. It's where the tandem was fun and the outcome didn't matter as much. It always was like, crap, whoever loses, if it's close, they're going to freak out. People are going to freak out. And I don't really have that from the grade 8 on into seeding.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of rare where we have the peak of stress as the first few runs, and then that gets alleviated. And I mean, I'm going really deep on this, but if you look at how a good movie is put together, a good video or a good story is put together, it's stress and relief. And if you look at any great movie, that's what it is. It's a buildup of tension and then a release of tension and then a buildup again, and it goes back and forth. And that's what keeps you enthralled in a good story. And whether it was planned that way or not, that is what seeding bracket does. You have a large amount of stress in the beginning, which is if you win, you're in. If you lose, you're going home. And then we get a relief from that once those battles are gone. And then you then very quickly find yourself in the final 4 of seeding where you're like, oh, there's this stress again of who's going to win seeding. Because there's a lot of pride in that. And a lot of drivers have kind of boasted that have done well in seeding. And then once again, then there's relief when it's over, but then a buildup of tension again at top 32. Right. And then a bit of stress relief at 16. And then at 8 again, it starts. So it's interesting that we've stumbled across something that mimics a behavior pattern that people are almost looking for.
And it is kind of like a movie.
It is, and which is great because at the end of the day, it's a story that drives us, right?
Yeah, there's an arc to it.
Yeah, so it's been good. I'm very much looking forward to that drivers meeting. I'll be sitting in for sure. Just to understand the different perspectives, because what's maybe said to me is not always what's broadcast, but I will say those drivers meetings, every emotion is definitely reached in those, and they're important, and a lot of things come out of them, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm glad that we do it. It's something that I implemented when I got to this position, and I think the communication aspect for me is like a massive one. I think so much can potentially go wrong if you're not properly communicating with people in the series, and a lot of that is just being available to do that. And whether people take that up or not, on the offer that I have out to teams, like, you have access to my calendar, book a meeting with me, whatever. If we do these quarterly calls where, we want it to be kind of mandatory, then at least there's that participation and exposure to kind of what we're talking about, and people can prepare, because we'll go through like what the preliminary schedule for the next season will be, and what some of the things that we're working on and what you should prepare for. And is there going to be a difference in route? And, when does this contract end? And, all those things that you may not have exposure to unless you actually reached out.
Yeah. And it's important. And I mean, now that the veil's lifted on that, there's a lot of big things that are going to happen and potentially change or not change. I actually have no idea. And then St. Louis becomes the breeding ground of conversation between all the drivers of like, okay, what do you guys think of this? Which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it in that regard. Touching on just other general rules. I mean, huge updates to rulebook, and by that I mean large amounts of retractions pulled out of it. Realistically, we've only seen a couple of minor updates since, which has been good. I do feel like in previous years, it's a lot, like almost every round we were adding 5, 6, 7, addendums to the rule book, where it seems to be now it's just minor tweaks, which has been great. And if anybody wants to nerd out, all that's available on the FD website. Scroll to the very bottom. You can see where all the rule books are. You can take a look at them. But the only major one that comes to mind is kind of going from the 2-second straightening more down to a 1-second straightening, which I think I really didn't have an issue with the 2-second, but I understand how some people might. And realistically, I don't think that change would have changed anything, because those straightenings, whether they're 1 second or 2 second, ended up becoming very large deductions, which pretty much cost the driver the battle anyways.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, if you're going to have a format change, and, we already know from history that anytime we change something significant, it takes a while for people to catch up to it. Mm-hmm. And we already knew that it was going to be complex. I mean, to this day, unless you follow the number that we draw from the winner of the event to get those seating brackets, you won't know unless you actually reach out and do it. So when we post those online, a fan is not going to know what number was pulled. The drivers might, spotters might, whatever. So we knew there was going to be layers of complexity to that people weren't necessarily going to get. And I hate that part of it, because I don't want it to be complex. But if you are going to do that, you might as well tackle these other things that you feel were problematic. And that was, looking at the judging apparatus as a whole. And, this is all we ever talk about 24/7. And so I know the implications of when we change rules and stuff like that, and what differences they actually do make in competition and stuff like that. And I think the 2 second to 1 second is just a natural refinement of what the original intention was, is that we were having so many controversial calls on things that really didn't matter to the general public. But in a black and white, incomplete to complete, was making the difference in these battles. And it might just be, 1 inch of the third tire over, or, how much of a straighten was that, which has never really been able to be, defined, and that's why we've been trying to put some time to it, because at least there's an objective thing there. Because everybody has a different opinion on what straighten means, right? And we all know that whenever you do a transition, at some point, those front wheels are going to go straight for a microsecond. Mm-hmm. And however long you hang that out there, depending on if you're a purist in drifting, or if you're kind of like, I want to see crazy driving, I don't mind a lot of mistakes, but I really want to see the closest tandem, you're going to fall on one spectrum or the other. So it felt appropriate to kind of tackle some of those things, and then to try and allow this to come to fixation for a while, because I really don't like changing major things all the time. I would much rather look at the things that I feel that are absolutely broken and fix those, and then make all of the other changes kind of modest or much smaller in severity, because it's so hard to re-educate every single year. And the one thing that we've seen since post-COVID is we've had this just incredible growth in the series, like double digit growth in every sector of the business for 3 years straight. It was just we've never seen anything like that before. And so then the goal for us became, how do we capture that and keep it? And that being the fans that were being added into live stream, coming to the live events or whatever. And in order to do that, you've got to make it palatable for them. And you got to make it palatable for a general audience, not just the hardcore. And so that was a real challenge, is trying to make sure that once we do this, that it's kind of going to be around for a while. And that was my nervousness with, going to the all tandem format in this particular season. I originally wanted to do it in 2025, but I'd been pushed. Thankfully, I'm glad Kevin pushed me. He was like, if we're going to do it in 2025, you might as well just tear the Band-Aid off and do it now. Yeah. We just finished our 20th season. Everybody will get used to it. Don't worry about it. It's going to be great. And it was one of those decisions where I just trusted in him. And I said, okay, cool, let's go. And it ended up being fine. But, to your point about the judging is trying to tackle two big things at the same time instead of one big thing and then waiting and do another big thing a year down the road just felt appropriate to do. And then just to kind of massage it a little bit once we feel like this is our thing now.
And realistically, like, we've been moving away from zeros or incompletes, whatever you want to call it, for a period of time now. It's not like this is just an overnight thing. I mean, there was a point in time where if you moved a cone even an inch, that was incomplete. The battle was over. So that level of severity has been dialed back for years and years and years. And now we're at the point where it's almost, I mean, you have to have a major incident to incomplete, which now takes a lot of the, protests and things off the table, because the vast majority of the protests came down to people incompleting, if not all of them. I would think, there was the odd thing here or there where someone's like, oh, you missed that they actually hit a cone, coming out of the chicane, or, oh, they actually did jump the light, that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, we've been on this path of simplifying and reducing the likelihood of people winning due to some technicality for a number of years.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. I think that if you nerd out on drifting, you at some point in your, experience of being in the sport, you might want to ask yourself the question, which I try to do often, is like, what of these things from the early days have we carried on and just never questioned?
Right.
What did we get from D1 that we adopted into our own program and then massaged it, and what stayed along, and why was it there in the first place? And an incomplete is a term that we came up with. It just used to represent a zero. And you probably need something like that, because people actually don't finish runs. People crash into walls and they spin out and things like that. But a lot of times when they make really big mistakes, we had gotten into the kind of tendency to automatically throw those zeros out. And we were missing out on a lot of really good action, because if you do that on the first run, the second run basically becomes pointless. It becomes an exercise in futility for the other driver, because the other driver really only has to just get through with a scored run. And, there are going to be situations where that has to happen, because the guy literally spun out. He literally stopped his car or whatever. But, if he is making it through, I would like to see both battles take place with the highest level of pushing their abilities as they possibly can, not having to worry about, the little tiny nuances of, oh, you know what, I accidentally dropped a tire here, or, I was straight for 1/20th of a second here. And, that used to be a problem. I can just push as hard as I can. And at the end of the day, the judges are going to judge it, right? Yeah. The mistakes are going to be the mistakes. The severity of those mistakes are going to be weighed up. And as long as I don't incomplete, at least I can still be in the fight.
Yeah, it's allowed us to see more and better, and people continue to push, and it becomes less of a chess match and kind of back to, a brawl, which is realistically what we're here to watch, right? Like, we want to watch action. And when it becomes a chess match and people are like, okay, all I have to do is this kind of chase, because we're fairly certain that he did this one thing that's going to result in a zero, or it's called out that it's a zero too early. It changes the dynamic of the battle and the event. And it's just not the show that people want. And really that's what we come back to time and time again, is what presents the best show. What is it that's going to keep people engaged, grow the sport, keep the fans happy? That's where we need to lead. And there are, things that need to be sacrificed for the growth of the sport, really.
Well, I think also too, like, it's pretty clear that that not just us, like collectively, globally as a drifting community, had an imbalance in what an incomplete or a zero was. To
Right.
me, that means you did not finish the run.
Yeah.
And not finishing the run means that you stopped doing what you're supposed to be doing, meaning you spun out, you drove off course, you disengaged in the battle, you crashed, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going on the transition and you settle for a second, and we would call that a straighten, and actually say it's a second, every other year besides this year, that would have been equivalent to a zero. Now, like, for a new fan, is that the same as crashing into a wall? Is that the
Right.
same as spinning out? It doesn't feel like it is. It feels like it's lesser. Particularly if the rest of the run is amazing and it's just that one, little flub or whatever.
Yeah. And as we want these drivers to push harder, and as we live on the bleeding edge of development of suspension and tire and setup, it's going to be more and more difficult to keep these cars perfectly at angle all the way through. I mean, that's the goal. And realistically, once we get into the top four, that's pretty much what you're going to see the entire time, barring situations. But we don't want to end something because of a very small mistake.
We've already handcuffed ourselves enough by, I'm not saying allowing, but we've made it so these cars drive so counterintuitively that the behaviors that the drivers are doing don't make sense if you just walk into an event. If somebody says to you that I can go faster for a certain period of time when I slam my brakes on or I pull my e-brake, you would think that they were insane in a normal context, but in a drifting context, that's totally legitimate because of how much heat the tires are making and what's going on. You have an ice skating style type of effect with the tires. And it's the same with smoke reduction, right? You can, just because you have smoke reduction doesn't mean you have speed reduction for a certain period of time. We know left foot braking is the norm. That looks crazy to people because you see the brake lights all over. That's why we got rid of the front brake lights. So there's so many of these things that are, if you are not like in the know of what professional drifting is, are going to feel confusing to you. And you're going to see it and you're going to say, oh, that was a mistake in judging because this driver let off throttle here or whatever. But why we are investing and trying to continue to do the technology side of things is because the things that are apparent end up not being what they look like. And the actual physics of the car and what's going on with the car is a much more nuanced story, unfortunately.
I think it's as close to magic as you can get. That, like, realistically, I don't know if this was ever published, but I worked as a magician for a long period of time, so it's something I'm
cool.
I'm not getting into all that on this show, but it's something that was my life for almost 10 years, was doing that. Anyways, what I've learned through doing magic is that it's such a simplistic thing that your brain almost skips over it. And when you look at it from the surface value, it makes zero sense. But then once explained and broken down, you feel like an idiot. And that's what I've learned more and more, especially as we've gotten into this kind of data stage of FD over the past year with the sensors and kind of what's been going on, maybe a little bit more behind the scenes than what the public knows. Like, we're pulling immense amount of data from these cars, and some of the theories and thoughts that we had as to what actually happens in a car is very different than what the data is indicating. And then as you start to overlay it over the footage, you're like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. Pulling the e-brake and speeding up is one of those great examples. We realized later on that, as you said, that the tire is riding on gas, that the tire is so hot that it's sublimating from a solid to a gas, and they're gliding on a pocket of rubber vapor. And that is why for a short period of time, you will actually gain speed by doing that, because you're hovering on a pocket of gas, which is absolutely wild to me. And the inner nerd in me just explodes every time I think about it. Yeah. But it makes
explain that to a newcomer and see what kind of look on your face, on their face you get.
Explain that to somebody who, didn't pass, grade 9 science. Like, that's where we're at, right? Like, it's wild that we're at the point that's where we've gotten to, where we have to start understanding physics and chemistry to actually understand what the hell is going on with these cars now. We're that far into the sport, which is great. I love it.
Yeah, I remember when we started getting the reports back from teams about, I need to drive my car like this. Mm-hmm. And this being something that right now you guys are looking on negatively. So left foot braking, or, when people were trying to introduce brake bias and things like that, or whatever, they wanted to advocate for those kind of things because of the banked courses or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, we had things in play like the front brake light, where the left foot braking made it seem as if the guy was always slowing down, when in fact he could be going at a stable speed. He could be speeding up. But if you're a fan watching for the first time, all you're seeing is that red light on the front, go, 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 go. And it looks like a negative. And we had to, work really hard with the teams to be like, look, if we're going to buy into this left foot braking thing, because this is how the cars are being engineered now, and it feels like that's necessary, then we need to get rid of the front brake lights as a tool, because they're no longer a tool. It's a miseducation tool. Mm-hmm. And we'll just go to the rear brake lights as something that the chase driver can have as a marker to understand what's going on. And then we're going to have to go a different direction on technology to tell the physical story about the cars, because the indicators and lights and things like that are not really helping. The modern day ones we have with decel light at least is giving us something with regards to momentum, which I think is helpful. Mm-hmm. But it's still a step away from where I think we need to go in order to tell the full picture and the full story.
All right, literally 6 of you have asked, and they are now available. The official Jacob Gettins Teal Toque is available at shopfd.com, and you can still use podcast 24 at checkout to save 20%. Cool thing is, also comes with a sticker. You get a bunch of different rarities. Look at 1 in 500 chance of getting the gold one. We got holographics, got a bunch of different ones. And since it became an ongoing joke, check this out. That is, I'd like to say a Where's, I feel like I'll get trademarked if I say his name. But there's a Where's Jacob. Awesome packaging. Super, super cool. Take a look. You can find me in there. But head over to shopfd.com. There will be a link down in the podcast description. Use podcast 24 at checkout. Save 20%. Yeah, we're definitely close. I mean, there's still situations where we have to take the data with a grain of salt and understand too that machines are fallible the same way that humans are. Hurst and Hately is a good example of that, where Hately's light was not responding in a way that like it should be, and realizing that more than likely there was some sort of issue with the sensor, because the light was not responding in a way that the rest of the car was indicating. And it took a bunch of replays to come back and be like, oh, this is the case. But ultimately, the human eye is what caught it. The judges made the right call. But taking a look at the light immediately, like, well, he didn't decel. And it's like, well, he did. He very much decelled. Just for whatever reason, this light never changed for the entire run.
Yeah. And not only that, is like we made our lives more complicated by adding a layer of technology on to those decel lights. Prior to last year, the decel lights had a reliability quotient that was pretty high, and it was very apparent when they weren't working. But that's run through AIMS, and now what we have plugged into it is we have the torque box, which is the telemetry that's being pumped out, and the video feeds. That has added a massive layer of complication that has made the reliability a lot different. And it's taken us at 3 or 4 events this year to get all the teams up to speed to be able to checklist that before we go out to the first practice. Because if we don't do that, we will invariably not be able to necessarily fix whatever the issue is. And so now we have this whole process where you have to check in, you've got to, turn your machine on, you've got to have it send a signal, make sure that we're getting it. There'll be a green light means go. Like, we have all these processes now, just to be able to ensure that we're getting the highest reliability quotient that we can on the existing technology, because we don't want what you just said to have happened. And of course, it always happens in the most inopportune time.
Yeah. But it's, I mean, those procedures are no different than F1, F2, F3, any other, where there is a portion of data that does get sent away from the car and the teams. I mean, that technological check-in is pretty standard place in a lot of racing.
Yeah.
So
we just happen to be poor.
In comparison.
So that's what makes it hard is, we're trying to do, a $2.5 million project on, $500,000 and over a period of years. And so there's so much sweat equity into this, and so much like, good Lord, man, are we going to get there? We've already spent so much money, but we've literally had people that have been working for free to try and get this done, and doing way more than is expected of them, because they care about the project and they want to see it, work out. But it has been a massive undertaking. Like when I greenlit it, it was at a time in my career where I wanted to do as much as I could for the sport as possible for the time remaining that I have left. And I knew it was going to be easier for me to do that without having to go back and forth with Jim on it. And, Jim has spoken to this as well. It's just easier when you have one person that can say, all right, go, And yeah, it's fine. I'm willing to accept the responsibility. You know, I remember the first year being like, dang, man, well, I wonder, like, I actually started thinking about what it would feel like to get fired. You know, and I'm not saying that that could really happen, you know, because I'm a shareholder of the company. But the reality is, if it fucked up so much, you know, somebody might be like, hey, man, like, this is not good.
Yeah.
And, you know, but I feel that it was the right decision to make ultimately, because we needed to do something. And we either had to live with the pain of like, oh man, that sucks. That didn't work. This is not working. This went out to the public too fast or whatever. Or we just sit and do nothing and not invest and keep doing the real, you know, basic drifting stuff, which is totally fine. But where are we trying to go with this? Like, we need to have the building blocks, I think, along the way to get somewhere. And if we don't start doing them, then we'll just kind of be stuck in the regular same old 3 judges, 5 judges, whatever it is, making decisions off of visual camera angles.
Yeah. I mean, say it time and time and again, keep doing what you've always done. You'll keep getting what you've always gotten. And it's not that we're not happy with it, but I think we all just want more or better, or to make sure that we're at least trying to push the sport forward and question all the decisions that were made before us and at the same time. I mean, that's, I think, what is super cool about the organization as a whole is just how open the conversations are and getting opinions from basically everybody on staff and a lot of people who aren't on staff about like, hey, what do you think of this? Like, what do you actually think about this? And it becomes a big group think. The discussions about drifting do not stop. I don't know if I've shown up at an FD weekend and talked about something other than drifting for maybe more than an hour. Very rare. It's usually like family, kids, how's the move going? Hey, have you seen this thing? And then we're right back into drifting. And that's basically, you know, 3, 4, 5 days at a time.
How many conversations have you had that have been like, hey, what do you think about?
Oh, bro.
And then fill in the blank, you know?
The amount of times you've turned to me like in a commercial break out of nowhere, you'll just be like, hey, what do you think about this? And it'll be so far off from anything that's going on. And I can tell it's popped into your head. You've read something somewhere, had a thought, and you're like, I need to express this. I need to make sure I'm not crazy. And then like dump that on me and be like, what do you think? And I mean, you and I've had great talks on it. And then a judge will turn around and be like, you know what? I've actually thought about that thing. And then, you know, next thing it's Kemp going, hey guys, we got 5 seconds till we're back on the show. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, cool. Let's come back to this. So it's great though. I mean, at the end of the day, as a fan of the sport, it's crazy to even have a say in the game. So I'm happy about it.
Yeah, I think the collective collaboration is really important just because people are coming from different perspectives. You don't always hear the exact same things from the same sectors within the drifting community. You may have a certain set, and even within the drivers, you're going to have a huge variety of opinions. We used to have this whole like, there was a set of drivers that were like, you know, the originals that wanted to keep it pristine, the old school way, and the people that wanted to be progressive and, you know, move towards technology and assistance and aids and all that kind of stuff. And there's a push and a pull, you know, the not wanting to overcomplicate the sport, make it simple, but at the same time, you know, try to provide more abilities to understand what's going on with the cars. But just the pure nature of the way that the cars have developed and the way the driving has developed just makes it so uniquely different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, it's just a completely different animal.
Yeah, I remember chatting with Mike Kojima a couple of years ago at Grid Life. I was looking at Dayo Shihara's, you know, championship winning car. And I was like, this thing is awesome. And at that time, you know, Mike basically looked at me and he's like, do you realize this doesn't even meet like pro spec standards right now? Like this thing, you know, dominated and just started like crushed dreams. And now anybody could build it in a few days. And I was like, it was just like one of those awakening moments where I'm like, we've come so far so quickly.
Yeah. I it just feels like I've been in a whirlwind for 20 years. The past 5 years have been the most crazy.
Yeah,
for sure. You know, it's weird, man, because I haven't gotten that feeling yet where I'm like, all right, I think I'm done with this, you know. I get to the end of the year and I always think that might start coming. Because I've been doing this for 21 years, you know, 23 if you want to count the preparation leading into it. Like it's been a career. But there's just something about being at the events that really hits home with me, and especially when I get to see people being successful. I think a lot of it has to do with the psychology of me not being a professional athlete that I wanted to when I was younger, but now being able to participate in people being able to do that. And that always is very meaningful to me when I get to see somebody come in, start fresh, make a name for themselves. You think about somebody like a Ben Hobson, like watching his story going from where he was in prospect to now where he is in pro. And now, and it's hard in pro, right? He's on the big boy team. He can't get out of seating. He's always getting these crazy draws. But that right there is part of the narrative. And I know that at some point it will click for him and he will get everything that he wants to get out of that program, given the skill set of the driver that he is. And so there's just something cool about seeing people succeed in the sport, whether it's these young kids that are just doing amazing now, or like Amanda Sorensen and, the first female podium and all that kind of stuff. There's something that hits home for me about that like kind of keeps the motivation going.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you being a new dad, just wait. It only gets better from here. But it is. It's like having a big group of kids where you know their stories very intimately. You understand struggles that nobody else does. So when there is those moments, when it does click, when something goes right, you're so much more proud because you're like, that's it. You did it. Like, I've been watching you do this. And I think that's, it definitely, it keeps the dopamine going. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know any bad people per se in drifting. I know people that I've had clashes with and things like that, but for the most part, everybody is pretty much a good person that I've come across from an athlete perspective. They might be a strong competitor. They might be an aggressive competitor. They might be a no holds barred or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're a good man or a good woman and, try to be honest and try to be forthright and all that kind of stuff. And so when you have that as well, that's part of the community in a general sense. Maybe not every single one. I'm sure somebody's probably stolen some parts here and there, but and we still haven't found that one tamper or whoever's.
Oh, the suspension gate. Yeah.
But I think that also is cool too, because it's like seeing your friends do well.
Yeah, I agree. I'd be amiss if we didn't touch on some of the standing stuff right now. We won't spend a ton of time, but I think it's really interesting because if you were to tell me some of these names coming up here, even at the beginning of the season, I definitely would have had a tough time believing it. So kicking off at Long Beach, obviously very wet event, super interesting behind the scenes, very difficult to get through the broadcast because literally equipment was blowing away. Yeah. Well, Jared and I were huddled in a corner trying to announce the runs.
Actually, that is when I wanted to quit. Sorry.
Yeah, I looked at you. You definitely had a face like, I'm done with this. I'm good now. But yeah, James Dean, Simon Olsen, Odie Bakshi's, that was your podium, which was crazy. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but seeing Simon come into his own is definitely one of those stories. And seeing Odie again fighting for a championship for another year is, that's something I'll never get enough of until he wins one. It's just so cool to see the drive, especially with how difficult a season Odie's had.
Yeah. So. And I know people love to say, oh, the same guys always do well or whatever. But I think if you say that, you just haven't spent a lot of time in other motorsports where literally that is the real thing. I mean, think about F1 this year is the first time in about 2 years where you haven't had a single person winning 99.9% of the races. And it's only been somewhat fortuitous that other people have won races and, he's on his fourth engine now and it's a little bit scary and, you never know what's going to happen. But in drifting, the probability gets higher that you're going to be more successful, the better resources you have, but it doesn't necessitate that you're always going to win. And, when we have years where we have 7 winners over 8 events, I think that that's kind of evidence for that. And then you have these guys that have these breakout years where the driving ability plus the team, so take Simon Olsen, for example, catapults him into a new realm. And without any other external forces, it feels as if he's going to be in that realm for as long as that program exists and he's willing and able to compete, with Odie and the team. It just looks like that's what it's going to be. And you see a lot of stuff like that is just really inspiring.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to watch, and obviously has created a lot of conversation about what it's like to have a proper team. And hopefully it means we see more of these team builds, because I do think personally that's a lot of what we're missing, but we're getting very close to it.
Yeah, I mean, look at the top 10 standings right now. Dean, Bachis, Osbo, Olsen. Okay, cool. We got that. Gucci, Sorensen, Manoa, Field, LZ, and Dylan Hughes.
So the best part is Ken being in fifth. One, love it. Everybody loves that. But he's actually tied in points between him, Brandon, Manoa, and Matt Field.
Yeah. There's four of them there.
They're all tied for fifth, which is wild. I mean, I think it just comes down to a couple, like how far they got in certain brackets and stuff. But yeah, it's wild. I mean, and then Adam, somebody who was only supposed to run one or two events, now in ninth. And then, even like looking at other stuff like Dylan Hughes over Chris Forsberg. Like there's a lot of changing in the guard when you start to look at this. Taylor Hall over Ryan Turk. Like you asked me this at the beginning of the year. These are very difficult things to kind of come to terms with. Connor Shanahan missing around, still sitting 13th. There's a lot in here. And this isn't like me going at any driver saying they should be doing better, but it's just showing the progression of the sport and how things are going.
And I think, to be completely transparent and honest too, some of this has to do with the new format and how it plays in, right? But at the end of the day, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, ultimately at the end of the day, it's how good of a tandem competitor you are. Mm-hmm. In a perfect world scenario, we want the two best guys that particular weekend facing off in the finals. But sometimes you're going to get a Shanahan, Osbo, grade 8, and you're going to get this incredible memory that like we were freaking out in the tower. And it was like, at that point, it didn't really matter who won to us because the entertainment value had just superseded in about 10 minutes worth of drifting, what we would have gotten in 4 hours. So, there's just really cool things like that. And I think, it's going to change the championship dynamics for sure. And we'll have to see how that plays out at the end of the year. I mean, for somebody like James Dean, it's almost likely that he should not have points for Long Beach because coming back from that burnt car felt like impossible, not just coming back, but winning. And that was an insane, beginning arc to his new story of like the tester year last year, kind of getting used to it or whatever, having that, again, crashing into the wall, jumping 3 feet, flying sideways, breaking his collarbone, getting third place, and then turning that back around and being like, I'm here to play.
But even spinning in Long Beach in the same year, like it was the first time he'd spun in competition in years. Like that's the progression that we saw in James Dean over a period of 9 events, right? And now globally, he's on like an 11 event podium streak. He's got 4 podiums in FD, 2 wins, a second and a third. Like we're seeing it again. We're seeing that dominance again, but it has elevated the rest of the driving. I mean, Osbo is definitely back on one. I don't think you can doubt that. He's sitting third right now behind Odie, who's in second. And once again, we've got Simon Olsen, who came very close to winning a championship last year. Now definitely wants to do better than his hero and definitely wants to do better than his teammate. So like that top 4 or 5 is going to be insane for the rest of the year. James has got a pretty decent lead. He's got 74 points over Odie right now, but there is nothing saying that James doesn't have a mechanical, doesn't have an on-off event, doesn't just something strange happen. We've seen those RTRs with the weirdest issues come out of nowhere. Like that's the best thing about drifting is like none of this is predictable. And we've also seen this happen to Odie, who like 2019 had 3 or 4 great events, I think back-to-back wins, and then the season just disintegrated. Like, none of this is a foregone conclusion by any means.
Or you'll get somebody in seeding And look, but probably the irony of it, it'll be Vaughn and Irwindale when James needs to get to the top 16, and, you know, Vaughn will slot him into the, you know, the top 32. And, you know, then we'll have if you win, you get to move on, Vaughn. If you lose, James Dean doesn't get to have the championship. Like something like that will probably happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. And that's obviously like what I enjoy the most about it. I mean, I think the other event that we haven't really touched on yet, just being Orlando and seeing both Connor Shanahan and Brandon Sorensen basically show the world why they're two of the greatest drivers. Like, we often talk about the Castro James Dean battle being one of the best battles of all time. In my mind, I still think the battles between Sorensen and Connor Shanahan have trumped that now. Going back and watching them side by side, they're both incredible, but they're incredible for two different reasons. Yeah. You know, the Dean Castro one was textbook, and the one between Connor and Brandon was just chaos, but like just perfect chaos the whole way around.
The Dean Castro one takes advantage of that thing that happens with historical events that get spoken about over time. Yeah. Where they get a little bit, they get better, they get a little bit more elaborate the moment you dive back into it. But like you said, if you go back and look at those battles compared to what we've seen recently, like they're right up there, you know, if not better. And we saw that with Osbo and Shanahan at Jersey as well, and how cool that was. I mean, just insane driving.
Yeah, the one more times. I mean, it's nuts. I'd be amiss if I didn't touch on Pro Spec for a moment, because we're also seeing a really interesting case there. You know, basically Tommy and Connor not running away with things, but, you know, probably one of, I would say, the best up and coming driver out of Canada versus probably the best up and coming driver out of the US right now. Going head to head, seeing some really good battles from both of them. You know, two drivers that drive constantly. Connor basically competes at every event he can get his hands on, and Tommy spends almost his entire day at a track, you know, teaching drifting. It's super cool, and I'm interested to see how the rest of that comes together. So yeah, Atlanta, Tommy first, Alex Yeager second, Joshua Love, you know, driver that stepped back into Pro Spec, and then New Jersey, Connor winning it, Amanda getting that very important, you know, first podium for a female. Coming very close to a win, and then Tommy taking third. So it's, I mean, anything can happen in pro for sure, but with only 4 rounds, Pro Spec becomes even more important to be on your game every single battle.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I always just have to say, and just kind of reemphasize, like, Pro Spec basically is like one of the banes of my existence, because every decision we make has to take Pro Spec into account.
Right.
Equally, like, it would be so much easier to run a 1 series championship. It would be so much cheaper to run a 1 series championship. Equally, we believe that it is absolutely necessary to have a matriculation process that is coherent from Pro-Am to Pro Spec to Pro. And whether or not you go into Pro or you stick in Pro Spec, that's up to you. But at least there is a matriculation process there. What we get from that is all the great things that we're getting out of Pro Spec, from an entertainment value, driver development, and all that kind of stuff. I didn't even know much about Connor until he started driving and becoming more noticeable, you know, in the series. And we always knew that Tommy was an incredible driver that had a great program and, you know, was representing Canada super well. But I think if you didn't have a platform for those guys to be able to compete in a Pro Spec, you wouldn't necessarily know about them in the same context. And so in a lot of ways, you know, you have to give those guys a lot of credit for supporting what Pro Spec is trying to do and participating in it. Even though, you know, some people still want to consider it a stepping stone. I think the driving that we're seeing has gotten so much better over the years, and it's become emblematic of like what it takes to go from there, you know, into the pro level. And we've seen some guys make that jump, and it feels more natural when they do that, instead of if we didn't have that and they were going from Pro-Am into pro, like how it used to be before Pro Spec, it wouldn't even make any sense.
Yeah, I think this definitely sets them up for success, not just on the track, but off the track, and understanding the logistics and infrastructure that goes into running a team at 4 stops that are vastly different and spread across the United States. So I've always been a big proponent of, don't just teach the driver, teach the team. And that's a hill that I'm willing to die on for sure. And we're seeing that now. I do think the seating bracket has had its most effect on Pro Spec.
Right.
It definitely makes a huge difference in Pro. I think the driving that we see in top 32 now in Pro Spec is better than it ever has, and it just gets better from there. And I do have to point to the seating bracket for that. You've got to drive 2 really good, you've got to win a battle just to show up in the show. And that alone has created a better experience.
I mean, it's one thing. I'm pretty sure every driver will tell you this, because this is what they say constantly, to me and to our team, is it's one thing to go out and drive tandem with your buddy on a non-competitive weekend and just get in that practice and the muscle memory. It's another thing to be in front of thousands of fans and people watching online, and it really means something in the competition in this moment right here for you not to make more mistakes than the other guy, and to get that level of experience, and that it is required for you to do that now, as opposed to only optional if you were to qualify into the top 32. And just think about how many people didn't have that opportunity, right? You've got 32 spots, 48 drivers. There's 16 people that are never going to do a tandem battle. And that happens event by event by event. So making them do tandem, I think, is a net positive for the fans, but I also think it helps develop the drivers faster.
Yeah. And I mean, at one point it was just top 16. So, I mean, that was even a harsher time. There were still 40 drivers showing up. So
Yeah.
it were dark times, but we're here for the progression at the end of the day. Like that's why we're all so excited about this, is that there is progression. We're not doing the same thing over and over again. And there's clearly not a fear to make broad, drastic changes to the sport. And, not saying that they're not without thought, but because as we alluded to earlier, there's constant conversation, there's constant thought, there's more sober second thoughts than I think most people can even imagine. But knowing that we're at a point of mass change and we're living through it and kind of getting to witness it, I still very much think we're going to look back 5-10 years from now and go, holy shit, 2024, man, that was it. That was the year when everything changed. So that's what I'm probably the most excited for.
And top 32 for Pro Spec, if it was top 16, everything about our internal life here would be way easier. And it would be way cheaper. But, when we made that decision to make both series top 32, we knew that we were never going to be able to go backwards. Like, going backwards is so hard. But if we kept it at top 16, there's so many other things that we can do related to the Pro Series from a timing, venue standpoint and all that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately it's the right decision, because it's not just about like what's the best thing for Pro. It's what's the best thing for the sport in general. And, having the enough drivers to compete in both series where the formats are the same, and being able to give them an opportunity and not having to push them aside and say, hey, we only have 16 spots. So you 48 drivers, more than 70% of you are going to be gone. And you might do one run and it's over with. That just feels wrong. Mm-hmm. So I think giving them the opportunity to not only like be in the top 32, but to compete in tandem to get there, like, just feels like a net positive for the sport overall.
Yeah. And I mean, we can take a look at the pro standings and for a moment think that, a Dylan Hughes, a Rome, a Nick Novak, a Taylor Hall, all within the top 15 may not be there. Brandon Sorensen as well, obviously in 6th, may not have been there if it was just the top 16. So,
right. Yep.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, definitely net positive, but I know you and I both have a pretty tight time constraint on this one. So thank you for doing this touch base. I'm glad that we got to do it. It's good to kind of air out the feelings and get some of that stuff on the table, both of our opinions and thoughts as to how things are going, which I mean, from my perspective, has been very positive, and yeah, I'm excited. One, for that meeting tomorrow, which I know people are going to be DMing me and asking me what the hell happened in it, but also for the rest of the season to see how this all develops.
Well, we appreciate you. We love you. I won't timestamp it, but we'll see you when we see you pretty soon here in the next week or so.
Yeah, it won't be long. I looked at my calendar and realized I'm gonna be spending more time with my FD family than I will with my real family for the next little while. So
the States are calling you, my friend.
Very, very soon, very soon. So thanks again for everything. For everybody listening and watching, please make sure to tune in and subscribe, and see everybody soon.